Have you ever worked up the courage to tell someone what was happening and walked away feeling worse than before you spoke? Maybe before you even said anything, you were already asking yourself, what if they don't believe me? What if they brush it off? What if I go through all of this and it doesn't matter? But maybe you told someone anyway because you needed to, because you were exhausted from carrying it alone. Somewhere in their response was something that made you question yourself, that made you feel like what you were living through was smaller than it actually was. It wasn't that bad. At least he doesn't hit you. You're still together, so it can't be that serious. Have you tried talking to him about how you feel? Just like that, the conversation shifted from what was done to you to what you should do about it. From your experience to their comfort with your experience. So you filed it away and told yourself maybe they were right. Maybe you were overreacting and you don't bring it up again. That moment, the decision to go quiet, is what I want to talk about today. Because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't weakness, and it was a completely rational response to an environment that had already shown you what speaking cost. Minimization is rarely malicious, and that's what makes it difficult to name. Most of the people who responded that way weren't trying to hurt you deliberately. They were uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do with what you were telling them. So they reached for something that made the situation feel more manageable for them and handed it to you as perspective. At least he doesn't hit you is not comfort. It's a comparison that sets a threshold for what counts as real. It says what you're experiencing doesn't qualify yet to come back when it's worse. Have you tried talking to him is not advice, it's a redirect. It takes the focus off his behavior and puts it back on your communication skills, like the problem is a misunderstanding rather than a pattern. It's not that bad isn't reassuring. It's a verdict delivered by someone who wasn't there, who isn't living inside of it, who maybe never has. They're measuring your experience against a picture of abuse that we've already talked about, the kind that happens in other families to other kinds of women. And here's what minimizing does over time. Minimizing doesn't just silence her in that moment. It teaches what her experience is worth. Every minimizing response becomes evidence she files away that speaking isn't safe, and her reality will be edited before it's accepted. The cost of disclosure is having to defend not just what happened, but whether what happened counts. So eventually she stops trying, not because nothing happened, but because she learned what happens when she talks about it. But minimizing is only one reason she goes quiet. Sometimes the silence starts before she even has a chance to be minimized. Sometimes the people closest to her never supported the relationship to begin with. Maybe her family had concerns from the beginning. Perhaps they said something early on and she dismissed them. She probably defended him, and in the end, she chose him over their reservations and built life inside of that choice. And now, she's supposed to go back and tell them that they were right. That's not a simple conversation. It's more like a reckoning. Those kinds of conversations mean admitting that the warning she dismissed had merit. Those conversations reopen old tensions, and they mean handing the people who already had doubts about her judgment confirmation that those doubts were warranted. If she left and went back once, twice, maybe more than that, the silence becomes heavier. Because now she isn't just admitting she stayed. She's also explaining why she returned, why she gave him another chance, why she believed him again. The choice to stay silent is easier than the judgment from people who are supposed to love you. Here's what those people may not know, or perhaps don't want to know. Statistically, it takes an average of 7 attempts before someone finally leaves an abuser. 7. Not because she doesn't love herself or she's weak, but because leaving is genuinely dangerous. The most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is when she tries to leave. The risk of violence escalates precisely at the moment she tries to get out. 7 attempts isn't a character flaw. It's survival calculations. Every time she goes back, every single one of those attempts, she has to decide all over again whether telling someone is worth the lack of empathy waiting for her on the other side. The eye rolls, the exhaustion present in their voice, the unspoken, or sometimes spoken, "You went back again." So she stops telling people, because the judgment from those people who are supposed to love her is its own kind of harm layered on top of everything else she's carrying. This is where loyalty and shame get tangled together in ways that are almost impossible to separate. She loves her family and wants their respect. She wants to be seen as someone who makes good decisions. Telling the truth about what's happening threatens all 3 of those things simultaneously. I know this dynamic personally. My family had concerns about my relationship. Concerns I minimized and dismissed because I was inside of it and couldn't clearly see what they could from the outside. Going back to them with the truth meant navigating not just my own pain, but the history of having defended him to the people I loved most. And I did go back, more than once, which meant every subsequent conversation carried the weight of that too. It's a particular kind of lonely, knowing the truth and knowing exactly why you can't say it out loud. Then there's the reason that doesn't get talked about enough. Safety. Not emotional safety, not the safety of being believed or supported, but physical, practical, everyday safety. When you're still in the relationship, if he's still in your life or your home, the people you might tell are often the same people he knows too. Mutual friends or family that you see at holidays. They're people whose responses you can't fully predict or control. In an abusive relationship, information is currency. What you say to someone, what gets back to him, or what he finds out you've been telling people, that has consequences. Real ones. Consequences she's already learned to anticipate because she's been living inside of this for so long that she knows exactly how he'll respond when he feels challenged or exposed. So she's calculating. Before every potential conversation, she runs the numbers quietly. Who can I trust with this? Who might say something without meaning to? Who's connected to him in ways I can't fully understand? And what happens if he finds out I talk to someone? That kind of calculation is not paranoia. It's pattern recognition. It's her nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do by months or years of learning what happens when he feels like he's losing control. But there's another layer to this too. Even after she leaves, even when the immediate physical danger has passed, talking about what happened carries its own risks. There are people who still could tell him what she said. There are situations where her words could be used against her, like custody battles, or family dynamics that didn't end when the relationship did. The silence doesn't always end when she leaves. Sometimes it extends for years afterward. Not because she's protecting him, but because she's protecting herself, possibly children, and the life that she's trying to rebuild. Speaking isn't always safe, and a woman who stays quiet because she's correctly assessed that speaking is dangerous is not a woman who failed to ask for help. She's a woman who kept herself alive. So if you've never told anyone the full truth of what happened to you, I want you to hear this. Your silence made sense. Not because what happened wasn't real. Not because you didn't deserve support. But because the environment around you had already shown you what speaking cost. The family dynamics, the minimizing responses, and the safety calculations that you ran automatically, and you may not even have recognized them in that moment as calculations. You weren't failing to ask for help. You were responding rationally to a world that had given you very specific information about what help was actually available. If you did tell someone and they brushed it off, that was a failure of their capacity to hold your reality, not evidence that your reality wasn't real. If you went back and felt like you'd lost the right to talk about what happened, 7 attempts. Remember that. Going back was not a forfeiture of your story or your right to be heard. If you stayed quiet because speaking wasn't safe, you were right to protect yourself. That instinct wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Your silence was never the problem. What happened to you was. I'm Rhea. I hope you'll join me as I continue this conversation. Until next time.